So that's kind of in the big picture, but then when I break that down, that relates to a lot of different things. So how do we fund this picture? So how do we realize it? How do we get it made? What's the best structure? What's the team that we need for this project? Editorially, how's the story going? What does it need? What is it missing? Where is its strengths? What can we leverage in the story? Where are opportunities for the storytelling to strengthen the film that perhaps the director might not immediately see? And then what's the future of the film? So where could this film be sold? Who can we get it in front of? Who should we get it in front of just to get their feedback? There are all kinds of other things that I feel like come into the picture, like tax compliance, HR compliance, legal compliance. You know, those are really important issues for a film. So I feel like, you know, certainly the way that I work is I leverage different pieces of that puzzle differently depending on the project. So I feel like I've never met a director who wasn't benefited by the support of an experienced producer. So I just want to add, in the case of Personal Statement, Julie directed and produced that. So she shouldered that, you know, for quite some time. And then it kind of reached a point where she's a first-time filmmaker, making a feature-length film, and she needed some support that I felt like I could give. So that was a film, for example, where I came along a little bit further when it was a little bit further along. So I just feel like a producer, we're thinking about the health and welfare of the project. We're always thinking long term. We're always thinking, where could this go? What does it need? And often, and we also tend to have a lot of relationships that can be really beneficial to a film. So I feel as though, you know, directors, the creative undertaking of a film, of a documentary film, is so extensive that to have someone who's thinking about all this other stuff, I think it only strengthens the project as a whole.
Sally, before I throw it to you, I omitted saying that you're here sort of in support of a film that you executive produced, right, called Against All Odds, The Fight for a Black Middle Class with Bob Herbert. If you are here on Sunday, it's a film you'll want to see. It's extremely well done. Bob Herbert, you know, a former New York Times columnist, quite a great advocate for social justice, is the protagonist. It's him doing this film, and perhaps we'll want to talk about that. But why don't you field sort of the same question? How do you see the role of a producer, and sort of why should a director approach you?
So, if a movie was a human body, the producer is the liver. And
it's not that bad.
The liver is a very good thing. If you don't have one, you'll die. So the thing.
I'm going to take that.
Okay. Absolutely. The thing I find most incredibly intriguing about directors, and I've loved so many of them, most of the time you want to strangle them, and that's okay, that's a good part of the creative process, is that they are people who, they're visionary, they're creative, they're thoughtful, they think about things in different ways, they take something and turn it upside down and stick it on its end and say, look at it that way. You're like, I never would have looked at it that way, that's pretty awesome. But they can never quite know where their computer is. They turn up with their shirts inside out most of the time. I mean, they're creative people. Their first goal in life is that creative thing that they're focused on, including the person I've worked with for 17 years. You know, Bill Moyers will come into my office and say, we should do this. How are we ever going to do that? What are you talking about? But in the creative process, as a producer, in the creative process, your answer is always, yeah, that's a great idea, because that idea is going to lead to another idea. And so I've always, the thing about directors and creativity is let the river of creativity flow over you, because it's what they're asking you to do is going to change. So just, they're either going to go, you're going to go with it, or they're going to go around you. So the question is, how are you, that supportive cheerleader, thinking about all the things that you need to think about, like, how am I ever going to do that? How are we going to get crew? Is that at all legal? Will we ever be able to broadcast that? Who would broadcast that? That's the most uninteresting thing I've ever heard of. But I always say, this is a bad idea that might lead to a good idea. So let's just talk about that. And I find giving directors a space to just think about the most creative, outlandish, thoughtful, safe working space is what a producer does. And they're not going to don't think about the crew or how many hours you want to work or that you want to shoot 400 days in the next 3 days. We could shoot 400 days straight, or we could shoot 100 people could shoot for 4 days. That's the same, equation, same money, same everything. And I find the thing that people find the most daunting and the most bone-chillingly frightening about film is what's it going to cost? It's like, you just tell me what you want to do and we'll figure it out. Because frequently, there's always a way to skin the cat, always. And just, if you're going from here to there, directors fly at this level and producers are like, figuring it all out. That's been my experience.
If you are a short filmmaker and your intention is to make a feature, you have a lot of hurdles to jump. How does a short filmmaker who has done a great short approach a producer having not done a feature before? How do you make a decision to invest in a short filmmaker who's going to make that next step?
I don't really make that distinction, and I'm not, or at least I haven't been in a situation where I have had to. I feel as though that might, I don't know if that's fact or fiction, that's how it works in the narrative world, that you really have to, I think in the narrative world that you really do have to have a strong short to then make a full-length film. But I don't ever, I always look at the person with whom I'm about to possibly work, and I look at the project and I talk to them about what their ideas for it are, and if they've done a great short, that's always, that's promising. And even if they haven't done a short, if they have a strong enough idea and I see merits in their approach to the work so far, then I take that pretty seriously. So for example, I just started talking to somebody yesterday about a film, and he's a cinematographer who has incredible credits of Sundance Films and Berlin and Toronto, and he's someone I've known for a long time, but he's never made a feature-length film, but we've been having conversations, and I think there's a there. So, so we're talking, yeah.
Well, go ahead, Sam.
I think if you're going to make a feature-length narrative film, you need a good script, and you need a good story. That's been my experience, is that if the material isn't there, they say, yeah, but it's going to be beautiful. It's like, but if there's no story there and the script is not strong, it's very hard to make a script. It's very hard to make a good movie without a good story or a good script. And in terms of feature-length documentaries, my biggest complaint with feature-length documentaries is they frequently don't have a third act, and they grind on. It's interesting for 60 minutes, and then the last 30 minutes, if there's not some aha in the last 30 minutes or a new way to look at the story, after about 60 minutes, after our brain says, oh, that's a television-length documentary, is there a reason why it needs to be 90 minutes or 120 minutes? And, there are films that have just been, like, wow. You took me on a story, you took me on a trip, and then, boom, the last 30 minutes was something I completely wasn't expecting and loved it.
But and just, my perspective is pretty squarely, while I do commercial work and I do branded stuff, I don't do narrative work at the moment.
Yeah.
But, filmmakers, you do have to be thinking about length, because if you do a 52-minute cut, you're probably not going to get into film festivals. It's very hard to get an hour into film festivals. They typically have a short cutoff at 40 minutes, or you go feature length. So I agree that there's a problem that in filmmaking, that a lot of times films are a little fat, but then I feel like that's a storytelling issue, and it could also be an issue of sometimes you really need to follow a story longitudinally, like for a longer period of time, to really get the satisfying, your satisfying full 70 to 80 minutes, or 3 acts, as we say in the business. And well, I think everyone here is in the business. Well, I know some of you are not in the business. That's why I said that. So anyway, but anyway, that I think that length factor, it's real, and yet it has to be reconciled with the story that you're telling.
There's, maybe it's a good segue here, but I do want to say that at Middlebury we take documentaries from about 50 minutes up. So you've already seen some good examples here. We've always believed that for many first-time doc makers, they may not have 90 minutes in them, but they've got a good 50. So let's show that. My segue is, and this is a question that Beth had raised, and I love this one, particularly for documentary filmmaking. When should a producer attach herself or himself to a film that may have already started development? When is the time to pull the trigger on getting involved?
I mean, I think that is such, it's so unique and individual to each film, right? So a lot of times, so here's by way of example, a film came to me, it was either yesterday or the day before yesterday. I always lose track of time at film festivals. It was yesterday. But that's a film where he shot one afternoon as to test the story and has had numerous conversations. So basically it has not yet started. Working with Julie, I started working with her when she was about 2 years in, because she was at a point where she felt, and correct me if I'm wrong, Julie, but I feel like you were at a place where you felt like you really needed support, you really needed another person. And then there's some situations, and I have to say sometimes it's related to money. Producers, we have to pay the rent too. So we need to be paid. So this idea, it's something I'm really being very vocal about. Producers do need to be paid. So sometimes it's a question of financing. So for example, when I did 32 Pills, which was here last year, that was a project that had seed funding. The filmmaker had money to get their project started. She had never made a film. And here's another, had been an editor. And she had money for us to get started. And so we got started together then, before even the treatment, even before the proposal had been written. So there's a whole...
Would you consider that to be unusual?
I would consider that to be pretty unusual. I mean, she had the filmmaker had the capacity to get us started. Now, unfortunately, that's not uncommon in the documentary film world, because it's such a hard world to make your way in. So a lot of times people have to have resources, independent resources, in order to do it. But still, it's not that common.
What happens if someone comes to you with a 20-minute reel and it looks really good? Is that the time?
That can be the time, and if I have capacity, and that's exactly, for example, what happened with Julie. I mean, I actually didn't have capacity, but I loved the project so much, and I had so much respect for how far she'd taken the project already and what she'd done on her own, that I felt like, okay, I can consult with you, which is exactly what we did, actually. I consulted for a year, and then when I became more available and her needs were kind of continuing, I was like, okay, let's do it. I'll shift gears. I'll get more in the weeds with you. So yeah.
Sally, on your end, having straddled both documentary and narrative, are there clear differences, A, in the role, and
Yeah.
B, in when you want to attach to a narrative versus a documentary?
Yeah. So if you're going to produce a film for somebody, make sure you want to talk to them every day on the phone, at least twice, for 4 years. And if you can't imagine doing that, do not produce a film for them, because they will call you every day. And you have to be able to say things to them like, you can write those emails in the middle of the night, the only person you can send them to is me. Do not send them to the person you were going to send them to, because directors get hot about their projects, and somehow in the middle of the night they think it's a good idea to write out these emails. And I think in the documentary, when do you get involved? I mean, when someone, if someone, again, if you have the capacity to really dive in, or have the ability to say, I'm willing to consult with you, we're going to meet once a month for this amount of time. But you get sucked in. There's just no way. It starts to build, in a perfect world, a project starts to build momentum and it starts to get really good, and then all of a sudden you're just on it all the time. Trying to figure out, how do I earn money to do this while I'm doing other things, or while I'm trying to earn money while I'm trying to do this passion documentary. I think my role on a documentary traditionally has been helping to shape the content and the story, and being deeply involved in the content, and being deeply involved in listening to the filmmaker, listening to the rushes, and helping them figure out what's the arc of this story, who are the best witnesses for this, or like, you have every single person in your film is a white man over 65 years old. Is there somebody else you might want to talk to, or is there another scene you might want to shoot, or what's some other thing that could help round this story out? On a feature film, there's just, if you're going to be the producer who actually gets the thing made, you are awash and drowning in just every detail you can imagine watching it. I remember sitting at my desk on my first feature and thinking, there are like 40 people in this office, and I just realized my job is to figure out what all those other people should be doing. That's my job. There's not enough hours in a day to do everything that needs to be done for a feature, because there's 7 major departments. There's locations and art department and talent department, AD department, camera department, sound department, post-production department. All those are departments that have 20 people in them. And so you just have to figure out who are your team captains, and how do you keep all those teams moving, and how do they all work together. And that is really the challenge of a feature film. There's a script, there's a director, there's a whole department that figures out when everyone has to be at work, what you're going to try and shoot in a day, and that, you really do have the big overview on a narrative feature film. You just have to depend on having an awesome team underneath you and a director who can deliver. I would stroll onto the set around 3 o'clock and say, got about 5 more hours, guys, how we doing? Because what you get in 5 hours is what you're getting today, because we don't really want to owe anything to tomorrow.
You mentioned shaping the content and the story. For new directors, do you think that they are open to allowing that kind of incursion? Do they feel too guarded about that? I suppose if you embrace a producer, you better be ready for that.
Yeah, I'll speak to my most recent exploration in working with a first-time director, which is funny because Bob Herbert was a first-time director, but a 40-year journalist. And he had a story to tell that ultimately wasn't a story, it was an essay. It was his personal essay. And he's like very mighty with the pen. He's a brilliant writer. But he had no idea how to make a movie out of what he wanted to say, short of him sitting there and telling you, which is boring. It would be boring. And so we had to figure out how to help tell that story with pictures. That is a story that spans 110 years. And it's Bob's opinion of that, of how those dots fit together. And it was a very interesting exercise in listening for me as a producer, and helping him, working with him to boil down his ideas to something that we could attach pictures to, and dramatic pictures to, and help him find witnesses to tell that story. So that was.
Did you want to jump in?
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that's the other thing, is that every producer, so every project is different and every producer is different. So if somebody approaches me and says, hey, I need somebody to do a budget and budget and set up my shoots and find the money, I don't know, it's hard. I'm sort of like, if you need someone to do a budget and all that stuff, or call somebody else, because I am very creatively involved typically, and I have really strong opinions, and I think that that's a strength that I actually bring to the table, because I worked in television, and it was funny, I always tell this story that I kind of frowned upon producing, and those people who like dealt with schedules and budgets and the reality of the project for like 20, well, not 20 years, but like in the beginning of my career. But then when I made my first film, it was really, for me, this awakening that you actually, I don't think, can be a strong filmmaker if you're not, if you or someone on the team isn't actually thinking about the financial picture, the schedule, the marketability of the project. That those things are key pieces. You are creating a work of art, but if you want it to thrive in the marketplace, then you are also creating a product. So anyway, all to say, for me, if somebody approaches me and kind of just wants them to just like do what they're told in the nuts and bolts, I kind of say, I'm probably not the right person for you.
I mean, it's very funny because there's so many, as you were saying earlier, there's so many like strands of what you do. Like somebody comes to you with a project and they say, you know, it's going to be this. My first question is the URL, is that URL available? And when you Google it, what do you find with the title of your film? And you know, it's like that. At the same time, like that's a brilliant idea, and maybe we could do this, and that would be kind of cool. And there's a guy I know who could help you with that. All that happens at the same time in your brain. It's just you're always sort of functioning on a million levels, and you share about 4 of them.
But to follow up on your question, I do think that, so we're, you know, as you all know, it's about if a director thinks if they want and need a producer, it's just also really essential to find the right producer. I was just in a situation where I was consulting on a project where it was a first-time filmmaker, and she was sort of desperate for a producer, and she hired someone, and they both thought that they were a fit. But as the project proceeded, it was really clear that the director needed something that the producer could not give.
Could you sort of articulate the questions that a director should ask in talking to a producer?
That's a good question. I think it's kind of like a marriage. So I think it's about the director being really honest about who they are and what they need, and the producer, and you know, Sally may disagree, but the producer being really honest about who they are. And I guess I would add one piece, because that was the piece at play on this other project. I think that many producers, we play a very large psychological role on a project, so that we are holding up our director, and we might be holding up the whole team. You know, it's very documentaries. You know, they're always difficult, and some can be really difficult. And so, for example, so if you know that let's say you're making a personal film, and you know that you really need a partner who can be supportive of your situation, you really need to find that person who you have chemistry with, who is willing to maybe kind of go in that direction. Go with you maybe emotionally or psychologically where you need to go. Like as a director, you need to say, this is a really hard project for me. It's very personal. So, I can't remember what the original question was, but it's important to, now I remember. But I do think it's important for there to be real candor at the beginning of the project, because of course it's an overstatement, but it is kind of like going to war sometimes. So who's that person that you want to be on the battlefield with, and who's that person that you have to trust each other so deeply. So that doesn't just come all the time. You know, it is about match and fit and chemistry and respect and all those soft things, which I think are often not understood as part of what a producer does, but it's actually key to what we do.
Okay, go ahead.
It's funny because when a director approaches you, they're interviewing you as much as you're interviewing them. It's that notion of, really, do I want to talk to you every day for 4 years? Because it becomes such a deep and thoughtful relationship. I mean, you're not going to know how they respond to being under deadline. You're not going to know how they respond to being under stress. You're not going to know how they respond to getting bad notes in a screening. You may have a director who works 8 weeks on a cut, and you look at it in 4 weeks, and you have a question, and they say yeah, and they look at it 6 weeks. it's like, your job is to be a sounding board for the material and for them. And so the biggest thing for me is like, can they listen, and do they really want help, or do they just want you to be more emotional than really letting you contribute? And when you say this doesn't really work, I mean, the classic things people say is watch it again. And I say, well, I'm not going to watch it again because our audience isn't going to watch it again. I didn't get it. It's what you think is there is not there. So that is the challenge of, at times you are there to support them, and at times you have to just say, this isn't, what we're doing, we really maybe need to look at what we're doing because we're not quite there yet. And a lot of times it's done. Nah, not quite. We need to keep going. Why? Because it's not there yet. And it's that relationship where that when you get closer, as you get down the road, you have to build this incredible trust and thoughtfulness. And I have the crazy experience of working on weekly television as well, which is, we call it wet wash, rinse, repeat. We have to do this again in 6 days. Are you kidding me? And the thing is, you do the best you can to get your film done, and whatever the timeline is, it's like we had an expression which was, that's Friday beautiful. We're on air in 4 hours. That's good. Move on. But that when you're making a film, that isn't, you want to make it the best it can possibly be and work as hard as you can, which you always do to the last possible moment. So, interviewing directors and them interviewing you is, do you really want to be in the trenches with them? When I'm in the stink, and that's how I hire. It's like when we're in a jam, I want people who are good fellow soldiers, as they say. It's a war metaphor.
Can I ask about, this is touchy, but I'd like to ask about what a director should expect for a financial relationship with the producer. Who's getting paid and when? What's the expectation on the producer side? The director should know. I mean, they're going to need it to essentially come up with money to pay a producer. You've talked about that. And while we're at it, and the Doc Producers Alliance is something that I'd like you to talk about a little bit more. But let's go back to the original question. What should a director expect to pay a producer, and when, at what part of the process?
Well, again, I mean, we have to pay our rent, and we have to eat, and we have to do all the things that people who have real jobs have to do. So, unfortunately, our industry is so unregulated, and it's so unpredictable, and fundraising and funding is so mercurial that I don't really have a hard and fast answer to that question. But one thing that we're really just, there has been this sort of thought like, we'll just get a producer, but anyway, one thing that the Doc Producers Alliance, one thing that we're really trying to advocate for is that producers need to be paid. There are a lot of producers who are working who are really struggling, and directors are too. I mean, everybody is. But we are trying to say, if you want to make a film, but you want to hire us, then we do need to be paid. Now, the terms and when we expect to be paid, I think that can vary. So I'm doing a couple of projects right now, and I'm on basically on a retainer every month. And I have a deal how much I'm going to work each month on that project.
It's a contractual arrangement?
I only work under a contract.
It's important.
Although Julie and I, it took us a long time. Every rule is meant to be broken. But anyway, so I do it as everyone does it differently, and that's the thing I think we're all trying to really figure it out. How can we make the pay structure work better for everybody, and how can we make the pay structure work better for producers, but then of course that is incumbent upon funding. So there are a lot of issues. Anyway, I just say I make it a relationship between time that I'm committing to the project and how I value that time, and then right now I basically have monthly retainers for each of my projects. And there have been times where, I'm just coming out of a period where a project that I'm producing did run out of money, and we were really far in, and so I said, okay, I will do what I can, and I hung on for 4 months, and then we secured a really significant amount of money. So, but I did go further into credit card debt. So because I didn't really feel I could jump ship, and and yet the project needed to move forward. So anyway, it's an interesting question, and it's a question I just want to say that you're asking that I think is unique to independent
Yes.
documentaries. So Sally, like when you're working at NET, and you have a director and a producer come on board, from day one, people are getting paid. And that's the big difference between the security of television and the insecurity of independent film.
Well, the funny thing is, I actually work for Bill Moyers, who raises money every day. He raises his own money, and so he works on an independent level in a different stratosphere than the small independent documentary film. The other thought about being a producer on a small film is there is a big opportunity at the end. It's end loaded. You know, if that film gets sold, there's money. There's real money there.
Sometimes.
Yep, sometimes there's real money there. Because, we made our first feature film on credit cards. Don't ever do that. Okay, I'm looking at everyone. Don't do that. Because we had a plan A, we were going to make a great film and sell it. Plan B, the director was going to go bankrupt. That was our two plans. So we thought those are good plans. We went to plan A. And it was like graduate film school. I mean, there was a domestic sale and there was foreign sales, and it was real money. Our investors, the credit cards got paid off, and the people who invested small amounts of money made their money back. It was an unusual story, but that's something to think about. If you're going to invest, there is a potentiality for money. That might not even be a word. That might be a George Bush word. But there's potential that there could be money in the end. And that is another thing to think about, is to secure, think about your deal in the big picture. Small amount of money now, 40% of the back end, 30% of the back end, 20% of the back end, whatever think about that, because once there is money on the table, it's harder to make that deal than it is when people are more clear-headed when there's not actual money piling up on the table.
So I totally agree with that, and I in my relationships, when I am on board as a producer, I do ask for a percentage of a net or a percentage of producers' share, because if you have investors in your project, typically the investor pool takes 50% of net, and then there's the producer share and 50%. But I really feel like, I don't know. I can count on one hand the number of people who have made real money in the back end, and I feel like budgets are going down. I feel as though what used to happen, what the model was, and we're all sort of like trying to figure it out right now. It's always changing. But I feel as though the model was get your film funded through funders and investors. Get your film funded independently as much as you can, and then bring it to festival. Bring it to Sundance, okay? Bring it to, what are the three? Like Toronto, Berlin, Sundance, or...
Middlebury.
Yes. But bring it to one of the big sales festivals. This is the most amazing community festival ever. But some festivals are more market festivals. Yeah, they're marketplaces. So it's like bring it finished and then sell it for a lot of money. But last year, Netflix basically didn't buy, Netflix has really changed the whole equation. So Netflix basically didn't buy anything. And then the year before, that basically happened too. So there was that year that Icarus and City of Ghosts, and there was one other one. And Step. Icarus sold for 6. Step sold for 6 million. Sorry. Step sold for, I think, 4.5 or yeah. And then City of Ghosts sold for 2. So everybody thought, okay, it's working. We'll get our films made. We'll bring them to market. And we'll sell them for loads of money. And then the next year, Netflix decided we're going to make everything as originals. We're not going to buy at festivals. And now the prices are coming down. So whereas, it was like, okay, a film could be made for now this amount, Now the expectation is that it's going to be made for 20% less. So I just feel as though I would say like cave canem, like just beware, because I'm not sure. I just don't know that many people who are making big money. If they do, congratulations. But
Yeah.
I just don't want to create false expectations in the room.
We're going to, we'll cover more of this tomorrow. You basically, once you have the right project, now what? What will you do to get it funded? You know, which are the best transactional outlets? Long-term is a PBS, et cetera. We have 15 minutes, so let's throw it to the audience for a bit, and if we have to come back, oh, that was fast. Go ahead.
What skills did you bring to producing, and then what skills did you have to develop on the job? It sounds like a lot.
No, that's a really good question. The skills, being organized is a good skill for a producer. Absolutely. Being able to deal with, being able to multitask is a good skill as a producer. Being able to deal with a lot of people and a lot of, all the time is a good skill as a producer. Patience is a skill I had to develop because I basically have the patience of a gnat. And you just always have to say, okay, no problem. I mean, people want to stand, I mean, I've had actors stand and scream at me. You think, someday you're going to need me. And I'm just thinking about that day right now because you are so not going to get anything you ever asked for. That is a skill I had to, and to try and listen through that when people are like ranting and raving about something, and just say, you have to just take a breath and say, how can I help you right now, and what do you need? How can I help you? And recognize that usually people are giving 150% and they're usually exhausted, and so you've just got to be grateful for their efforts. But this is where you turn into the liver. You just process it all and try and make good things come out of it. And that's a learned skill. And then the other skill that I find really interesting is, as I always say, the answer in the creative process is yes. And saying no doesn't keep things moving along. Just say, yeah, okay, yeah, we can do that. I'm sure we can make something work. Let's keep going. But the base skills, for a very long time I did that sort of organizational thing, like if we shot for 42 days and they cost 37 cents a day to shoot, that would be this many, that. I did that for years and years and years, and that is just a rock solid base to stand on if you're going to become a producer who deals with the creative things, because the money of it doesn't scare me. We'll figure it out, or we don't have the money to do that, or we need to find, a little miracle has to drop in our lap. And it's astonishing how often little miracles, you're like, I can't believe that just happened. That's the most unbelievable thing. That's exactly what we needed. So, and everything builds on relationships. So be nice all the time. Because that PA who just did the stupidest thing on the planet Earth is going to be a director in 5 years. So, just no doubt about it. And they were like, oh my God, you didn't even yell at me when I did that thing. No, you didn't yell at me when you did that thing. Now you're a big director, look at you. So, that's fine.
Who else? Questions?
Lori,
Gus?
would you
Yes.
repeat the question?
Okay, I will.
So I'm a documentary filmmaker. I've been making movies for 25 years in Vermont, and I produce all my films. So I raise all the money, I direct it, and I distribute them. Okay, so of course my dream is to get I probably think this will never happen, but to work with a producer who actually helps raise money. So my question to you is, how much do you guys actually work on bringing in money? Because, to me, it was really nice in the beginning we were talking about the director has all this freedom, and for me, I am usually directing the film and raising the money at the same time. So do you take on that burden? And because that's a huge helpful thing for directors.
I would say that on any of the projects that I'm working on, I spend 50% of my time raising money.
Yeah.
Directly or indirectly, or putting together, building the scaffolding so that I can approach that person or that entity. I devote a real lot, and I devote a lot of time to just building relationships, even if my current projects are not a perfect fit for people. But yeah, I spend like 50% of my time
Who else has questions? Oh.
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead.
We have an expression in the office, which is when we go out to meet funders, like, get a firm grip around their ankles and shake them till the money comes out of their pockets. But that said, I'm always surprised at who may or may not come up with money. And so it is an interesting thing, kind of keep your ear to the ground, figure out who's got money, who's potentially funding. There are the big agencies, there are the big foundations, and I think, how do you create enthusiasm about your project? It is every day. And as I say, I see it every day in my office, and I see it on the project we're working on now is just constantly, trying to help people keep relationships open and keep people informed. If you're making a documentary and you have a group of people that are doing it, if you have funders, I always say, if you've done a shoot and you've done something really great, send out an update. Say, just a quick update. We shot, and put pictures in it because people like to look at pictures. We shot something really great. We met an amazing scientist. We had a remarkable blah, blah, blah. And, keep people involved, because I think, you may meet somebody and they're not going to say, I'm going to give you $100,000, but you may meet somebody who says, that's kind of an interesting project. And then after they get 2 or 3 updates, they're like, what's going on with that project? And then, you may not reel them in for a lot of money, but sometimes it's incremental, and they say, I'm not in a position, but I have, my friend is a blah, 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 but it's work every day, just keeping that sort of the momentum of the ball moving forward.
And that's real. And you probably know this, but it was certainly like an education for me. The more that I started fundraising, it's not that you're just necessarily asking people for money, because people don't just want to give you money.
Right.
They want to have a relationship with you and a relationship with this project. So really having a relationship, letting them know what's going on, inviting them to things, the newsletter, I think that those are incredibly, just incredibly important ways to think about the funder filmmaker relationship. So anyway, that's like a whole other conversation, but it really is, it's an important piece of it, and that's probably also why I do spend so much time, because it isn't always just like asking for money, it's being in contact with funders, current, past, it's having those relationships with people. They're people.
Yeah.
So.
Someone told me something really important once. They said, don't call them only when you want something. Yeah. Call them to just say, hey, how you doing? Because then ultimately, then when you grab them by the ankles and shake them, money comes out of their pockets.
So if you come back tomorrow, we're going to do this one more time for an hour, we will perhaps explore what you're saying about the relationship between the funders, because I'm assuming that there are funders that you want to go back to who have liked what you've done, liked the project, and they're willing to keep supporting you. So we'll explore that more in depth tomorrow. Who has a question? Yes? Go ahead.
Do you have any suggestions for a director who would approach you with a pitch? Specific to that pitch, that could be as specific as keep your sizzle under 10 minutes, or as general as just be excited when you're pitching it to me.
Did everybody hear the question? Yes, reasonably about. Yes. No.
Some no's there.
Okay. So about approaching a producer with a pitch.
Yeah. Any suggestions for
making that a good, how to do it right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or do it well.
How to do a good pitch, do it right.
I really don't like to be pitched. I guess I like this idea about pitching me with your 30-second elevator pitch. I guess I would just say, I really like to have a conversation with somebody about a project. So talking to them, every project is different, and so, some people are able to cut together a 10-minute sizzle reel and have the resources or capacity, and then some people may not have the resources or capacity. So I unfortunately, when I go to certain people, I have maybe a toolkit that I like to have when I approach people, but when somebody comes to me, I just want to have a conversation and maybe see the best of what they've got, like the best of whatever they might have, whether it's written materials or something edited or just some selects.
So if you're going to pitch somebody, if you have to do that, you can. Make sure you've seen just about everything they've ever done. If they wrote a book, read it. If they have a screenplay that's published, or they have if they've just written an article for Vanity Fair or Esquire, or they're in this month's edition of Filmmaker magazine, know what they're doing and know who they are. There's nothing more boring than having somebody sit down and have no idea about the work of the person they're talking to. I don't expect everybody to watch every show I've ever done or every movie I've ever done, but if people have no idea what my experience base is, it's like, why are you talking to me? I mean, it isn't a thing about a conceit or anything, but there's just a conversation. If people are familiar with your films, you have something to talk about. So I think if you're going to approach people, do your homework. It's not that hard to find out just about everything that people have done. It takes 15 minutes, and then watch their work. I had an experience where someone was desperate to talk to Bob Herbert about the New York Times, and I said, I will get you a call with Bob Herbert, but you have got to watch his film and read his 2 books and at least 20 of his columns, and if you're not going to do that, I'm not going to make the call for you. And she called me back and she said, I had the most amazing conversation. He told me all about his work, and I had a great, it's like, people, yeah. I can talk from my experience base, and you have an opportunity to see my experience base, and then we have something to talk about. And so do your homework before you pitch anybody.
Okay, well, I want to thank everybody. Oh, go ahead, Joan. Let's go on.
I just had a question for Sally about the narrative side.
Mhm.
You mentioned that narrative's the key is a good script.
Yeah.
Or
a good story. It can be a story. Yeah.
Or do screenwriters ever approach producers, or where does a screenwriter go when they have a script?
To a producer.
And go to a
And a
producer?
director too.
Because you kept talking about it has to be a director.
And no, I mean,
Or it
eventually
sounded like it had to
you need a director.
Right.
I mean, if you have a script and you can attach talent to it. I was talking to a filmmaker today that she has a fabulous script. I said, who's the lead? You know, because basically you have this experience where you go to people to invest money in the movie, and they said, well, if you could get Brad Pitt, and you think, if I could get Brad Pitt, would I be sitting here talking to you? Get over it. You know, in a narrative situation, talent is also key. So if you have a 6 degrees of separation from somebody, some great actor, that's also another way to go, because they're going to be able to connect you to directors. You need a director, you need a producer, you need a good script. So you need to put those building blocks in place, and then people finance on talent. They don't finance on. I mean, they finance on if you're Terrence Malick or if you're Martin Scorsese, but they don't finance on somebody who's done 2 great films. I mean, you may get a Hollywood deal like that, but in terms of an indie, you need some name, something that they can sell. And when you write your proposal, you just say, they ask you 5 or 6 people, the list, we're thinking of leading women like. And then you pick, and you go to IMDb and you figure out who was born in 1964, who's the right age for that, and you say, it's like Mary Louise Parker, Parker Posey, or whatever it is. But you start to build your house of cards as best as you can, and you start from, if you're a screenwriter, I would say have a director or a producer read your script. And then if you can get an actor attached, all the better. Who's financeable?
Okay, now we're almost at 5. So these fine folks will be